So what is this new information that we have about the January 6th pipe bomber? And why is the pipe bomber portion of January 6th so critical to untangling the entire plot, the entire Fedsurrection that happened on that day? Well, to present to us this new information, we have with us the founder of Just the News, friend of the show, John Solomon. He's an investigative reporter extraordinaire. Just a really solid guy. John, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, Liz. Yeah, you set it up right. If we solve those two parts of this case, we solve the whole case.
Yeah, and I think of this often, John, actually, when Congress has these extremely complicated, like, hearings and investigations and select committees. And I'm like, dude, identify the pipe bomber and identify the gallows man, and you've saved yourself probably $10 million here. Or I should say, you, John, are saving them the taxpayers, tens of millions of dollars here, because you're the one that's actually doing the legwork here, unraveling this story. Talk to us about the FBI's original narrative about the pipe bomb. The pipe bomb, we were told, was planted on January 5th. It was found on January 6th, coincidentally, just moments before the first breach of the Capitol. But you have access now to information that says that this narrative that came from law enforcement originally, this is not true.
Yeah, well, listen, we got it from the FBI. Listen, it's easy to group the FBI as to one a large organization. It is, but it's a different organization under Kash Patel. And Kash Patel has always had his doubts about what happened on January 6th. And now that he's got access to what are known as the prohibited case files and other drives of evidence that Congress had never accessed before, we're beginning to see that the narrative doesn't hold up. The narrative on the pipe bombs has been simple. They were planted the night before. The evidence came from Capitol Police, who gave the FBI a couple days after the episode this video footage. You can see these guys out there, and it looks like they're planting a bomb near the DNC. At least we don't.
Yeah, like the black hoodie guy with the backpack, right?
Yep, and it looks like he's got a phone in his hand. So you'd say, well, how hard is it to solve that case? It looks like that's a phone. But to date, they've never identified that person. They have no phone tracking in that time frame that matches the action of this person on video. And so over the last 6 months or so, some people in Congress, like Barry Loudermilk, the chairman of the subcommittee, looking and starting to wonder, was that a head fake? Was there something different to look at? Was this a training episode? You start opening up the possibilities of things that you didn't think about in the original analysis, when it was so clean and cut, when the FBI gave us a nice cookie cutter of what they thought the storyline was. And so all of a sudden, Kash Patel comes up with some new information. One is the lab report. The lab report shows that both of these bombs were not likely to have been active, meaning they would not have likely exploded with the triggers that were on them. And they use language like, if they had been properly assembled, they would have exploded, but it doesn't look like that. And I had one of the greatest explosive experts in the FBI's history, Fred Whitehurst, an epic whistleblower who's blew the whistle on the 1990s Clinton era of the FBI, and it led to massive reforms in the FBI. They were cheating on science. They were making up science. Fred blew the whistle. And as a result of that, the FBI became a better laboratory. And they did a lot of reforms. They had to notify a lot of defendants they cheated. So Fred is one of the most influential people in forensic scientific history, certainly in modern history. He looks at it and said, listen, this report has a lot of problems in it. It's made to make it sound like these bombs were dangerous and terrible, and those bad Donald Trump people probably planted them. But when you get into the science, it does not look like either of those bombs were going to explode. There are two key things. There doesn't appear to be a lot of black powder in the bomb that would be the propellant for the bomb exploding and putting out dangerous material and shrapnel towards people. And then two, if these were planted 16 hours in advance, the bomb maker had only a 1 hour timer on it. So if you planted them 16 hours earlier, that timer is gone in an hour. What happened? So that's the first piece of evidence that I think both Kash Patel's internal team at the FBI started raising questions about. And then, of course, the Congress and the people have been looking at this. Then a real bombshell came. And that is that there was a witness who found the Republican National Committee bomb. And that witness says there is no chance that bomb was planted 15, 16 hours before. And the answer is because I walked by it. I did my laundry. I walked right by that space. The bomb was there. I put my laundry in the machine. I walked back, and then the bomb was there. When I went down to the bomb, there were still 20 minutes on the timer. Now, none of that fits the 15-hour narrative that the FBI had long bestowed upon the American public. And by the way, that narrative comes from the Capitol Police, from their video footage. So it starts with the Capitol Police. And then there's a second oddity about this woman. She has to go and tell the FBI, hey, don't you want to interview me? I called in 5 days ago and no one's ever followed up with me. She has to beg the FBI to actually interview her. Now, if you're in a pipe bomb case, let's take the Boston Marathon case, anyone within a zillion miles of those bombs was interviewed. The woman that finds one of the two bombs 5 days later hasn't been interviewed, and she has to call into a tip line saying, hey, I'm the woman that found the bomb, and no one seems to be interested in talking to me. So that is the second oddity. The third oddity is something that I think folks are going to have to absorb for a while, because when you start to look at this, she works for a company called FirstNet.
The woman who found the RNC pipe bomb.
The RNC pipe bomb.
The laundry woman.
Witness, right. The woman who finds it. The laundry
Okay.
woman, right. She works for a federal program called FirstNet. FirstNet is the system we set up after 9/11 to make sure if there's a crisis, law enforcement and first responder cell phones get priority on a network and civilians have to wait. Because during 9/11, a lot of cops couldn't talk to each other on cellular systems because the system got clogged. Everyone was checking on their loved one. So this system works. The Commerce Department is part of it. She works at the Commerce Department. And according to her own biography, she works for FirstNet. According to Loudermilk, she works for FirstNet. Okay, that's interesting. She works for the first responder network and she calls in a first response. But now it gets even more bizarre, according to Barry Loudermilk and the evidence that we now have. What is that bizarre twist and turn? Well, the FBI tried to go find phone records of who was in the vicinity of where these two pipe bombs were loaded. And we've been told for a couple of years that the data was corrupted, that it was lost.
The phone data, like the geofencing, geo-tracking data?
The geo-tracking data. So
okay.
The geolocation data that would show whose phones were near there, it got corrupted by a download. And guess what program, what company handled that download when it got corrupted? FirstNet. FirstNet does it on behalf of at&t. Now, we don't know why that is. I've talked to some phone experts saying the most likely scenario is that at&t had the phone data. They saw some first responders' phones in there. They saw some cops or other people that are in law enforcement or in the first responder program, and they send it to FirstNet to make sure that before they produce it, they don't give up anything sensitive. That's a possible scenario. But it is FirstNet who's then downloading the data, and it gets corrupted during that download, and all that phone data that could potentially show who might have been in the vicinity when the pipe bomb was planted is lost. All right. There aren't many coincidences in Washington that are accurate. So you now have Barry Loudermilk. I did an interview with him just a few days ago, who says, I don't believe the narrative anymore. I don't believe these bombs were planted 15 hours before. I think something smells rotten in Denmark, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. And the difference for Barry Loudermilk today versus a year ago is that he's got a different FBI. He doesn't have the Chris Wray obstruction FBI. He's got a Kash Patel FBI that's really sincerely interested. Now, the problem for Kash Patel is all the evidence is 4 or 5 years old. Things have been lost. Congress has been trying to reach this witness. They haven't been able to reach her. So, time passes on and the evidence gets stale and the evidence trail gets stale. Now, that said, there are a lot of things that can still be done. They can go to at&t and say, tell us the phone numbers that you saw that triggered you wanting to go to FirstNet to check this out. That'll be a valuable piece of evidence if at&t were to cooperate with the FBI or the Congress. You got to re-interview the woman. You've got to go look and see if there's any video footage that we didn't look at the RNC that changes the timeline. Maybe we should be looking in the 45 minutes before she calls in the bomb. Those are all very important things. And then I think the fourth piece of the puzzle, clearly from what Fred Whitehurst, the great FBI lab and explosive expert and the whistleblower, said, is the FBI has got to go back and redo the analysis. Take the scientific evidence from 4 years ago and don't put, he thinks there's a suppressor on it, meaning that they've tried to make it look like something that isn't. Let the science speak for itself and put all that science out. Those four things could jettison a new lead or create a new opportunity to come back and solve this case. But something doesn't smell right in Denmark right now. And I think the second part of it is, if that part of the story is a problem, if the phone record data location for that is, maybe we should start looking at other places around the Capitol that day, like the area where the windows are crashed in and where the doors are breached. Who was in that vicinity at that time? That's a very important part of the evidence now that maybe 4 years ago, because everything seemed to fit nicely in a story, you might not have looked at with a skeptical eye. Now I think you want to look at, were there law enforcement or first responders near the breach of the door? Were they in the Capitol? How many were in the Capitol that weren't declared as law enforcement? Who are those 26 undercover informants that were in the crowd before the violence started. And most importantly, and I think this is going to be the most explosive thing we're going to get in the next month or two, there are 26 undercover informants for the FBI. Now, the first thing is you think, well, that's a sinister thing, but maybe they were reporting real-time things of what were going on. Maybe in the 4 or 5 days before January 6th, there were intel reports coming in to the FBI that suggested something more serious and severe was going to happen, that maybe people were going to go with guns. Maybe there was going to be an armed insurrection. If that data came into the FBI, but it doesn't get distributed down to the frontline officers at the Capitol Police, and I think that's what we're going to find, who made that call? Who stopped the information that might have told the Capitol Police, you better staff up. Hey, you ought to re-examine your decision not to bring the National Guard in. All of those things become very, very important, because if the bombs are a diversion, and the real consequence of those bombs being discovered at the very moment they're discovered is that large numbers of officers respond to the scene.
Yeah.
They're taken away from the frontline protections on the outside of the Capitol. It created a security consequence at the Capitol. If that's a setup, or if that is some diversion that was intended to be a diversion, meaning the bombs weren't supposed to go off, it was just to create panic. You combine that with maybe people suppressing intel that would have created a different security posture, and you start to wonder whether there are elements of a setup. That's what Congressman Loudermilk is looking at. That's what he said on my television show last week.
Yeah, it's so sinister, right? I think 5 years ago, if we were talking about this in this way, people wouldn't even believe us. They'd be like, wow, this sounds like such a conspiracy. And
we'd be in a rabbit hole 4 years ago, no doubt about it.
It is a conspiracy. That's the thing. That's it. I mean, there are conspiracy theories and there are actual conspiracies here. So hypothetically, if this were the case, right, there's been long held speculation that these pipe bombs weren't real bombs, that they were fake, that they were supposed to look like them. I mean, your information is the first information that I've heard that it's been confirmed by an expert that no, these weren't really operable. We've always just speculated that the way that police responded isn't really the way that police respond when they think that a pipe bomb is operable. They were responding as if there wasn't a threat there. Otherwise, they just kind of responded stupidly.
Well, no, listen, they do. They bring a bomb squad in. They create a detonation zone. So they did treat it as though it were live at the time, which, by the way, takes away very serious resources and time away from the Capitol when the Capitol is starting to become rowdy and potentially in threat. But they do, the people who respond actually do respond to it like it is.
Like it's real?
It's real. Yeah. The problem is it doesn't look like it's real. And the key language, forget Fred for a second, who, by the way, has impeccable credentials, but the report itself keeps using the language. If this had been properly assembled, it would have exploded. The inference is it wasn't. Now, most FBI lab reports of explosives that I've seen in my 35 years of covering the FBI have a determination. Was this bomb viable or was it not viable?
Yeah.
These reports are left silent on that issue. It's made it to make it sound a lot more nefarious.
Like it was a mistake.
Yeah.
Or like incompetence versus intentional. That's actually a pretty serious distinction. But I want to go back to something else you said. So if this were a diversion, which is plausible, intended to draw Capitol Police and resources away from the Capitol right at the moment, coincidentally, what was it, like 10 minutes before the first breach happened?
Yeah.
And if the reason that there weren't more police at January 6th at the Capitol that day were because of suppressed intelligence or because someone said no to increasing staffing, like hypothetically, who is that? Is that someone that, a name of some swamp creature that we don't know in the bowels of the FBI and the Capitol Police? Is this a politician in Congress, related to Nancy Pelosi? Because she was speaker at the time. Is this someone in the administration? Like, who is this?
We don't know yet. There are so many oddities to the law enforcement documents we now have in this day. Let's remind some of the things that we know have documented. We have cops putting handcuffs and important things on the ground and leaving them. Then cops are taught never leave your handguns, your guns, or anything on the ground. That is a behavior I've never seen at any sign, even in the chaos of a riot. Cops know you don't want to let those things in the bad people's hands. They leave a bag of stuff on the ground and people run off with it. That is something I've never seen in a riot scene or with any trained police. Remember that the Capitol Police had some riot squads on hand, the civil disturbance units are called, but they couldn't get their equipment. Somehow they were locked in a bus over by the government printing office. If you know there's a major episode planned the day, who locks their gear in a bus away from the Capitol? That makes no sense. Then you got the intelligence whistleblowers who came out of the intelligence unit of the Capitol Police. My very first stories on January 6th were focused on the fact that Their intelligence did not match what the FBI was getting. The FBI was getting far more serious bad intelligence, suggesting maybe something bad's there, and they're not getting it. And then what they get, it gets watered down more before it gets to the decision makers, Chief Sund at the Capitol Police, about don't expect something too bad. It'll be okay. Maybe like other protests when the intel was not that way. Who suppressed that intel? Then you've got the bomb. And then I want to go to the other one you mentioned, because I think the other episode that makes absolutely no sense in my experience of 35 years of being in Washington. A bunch of people come out at 6, 7 in the morning onto the secure Capitol grounds, and they start erecting gallows, and no one in the Capitol Police say, hey, you don't have a permit for that. You can't do that. That's unsafe. That's allowed to go on. Now, try walking on the Capitol grounds. Say, just bring 2 2x4s onto the Capitol grounds today. See what happens. There could be about 5 cops on you in about 30 seconds. Like, you're not allowed to bring those in there. You're not a construction crew. They control the grounds so significantly, except they allow a group of people to set up a gallows without
a gallows.
Yeah. It makes zero sense. None of that is normal law enforcement behavior. Now, maybe we had a completely incompetent Capitol Police. Maybe there's something more nefarious. I don't know. Listen, there's a lot of incompetence on that day. You can see. Remember, one of the most important scenes that I was able to get in the video footage, a cop lets a few people out the door, a couple of the bad protesters out the door. The door says, don't open this door, because if you do, it's going to unlock the door forever. The cop pushes the door, lets the people out. What happens after that door is now unlocked? 300, 400 people come into the Capitol thanks to that one law enforcement officer's mistake. There's enormous law enforcement mistakes here. Now, that may suggest that the Capitol Police were poorly trained. They had lots of money, but not a lot of common sense. There could be something more sinister. Maybe all these are intentional acts. The most important thing we learned in the last 2 weeks is that Barry Loudermilk no longer believes the timeline and that everything's back on the table.
Yeah.
My reporting at the FBI suggests the same thing, that Kash Patel has gone back and said, start all over. Don't make any assumptions. Throw everything out you had about this case and restart from the beginning. That allows things to be reexamined in a different light. And I think we'll get some different analyses in the next few months.